Pope Gregory IX sent out a special message in 1233. It was called a papal bull. The bull had a fancy Latin name, Vox in Rama. This message talked about heresy. Heresy was a big problem for the church back then. It meant believing things that went against official church teachings. The Pope saw heresy as a huge danger. He wanted to stamp it out. This specific bull was aimed at a new kind of heresy. It was popping up in Germany. Some people were said to be part of a Luciferian cult. This cult, as the Pope understood it, worshipped the devil. They did strange rituals. And they often used animals in these rituals. This is where cats come into the story. The bull described these rituals in a lot of detail. It said followers would kiss a toad. Then a very pale man would appear. He would kiss them. After that, a dark, shadowy figure would appear from a statue. This figure had eyes that shined like fire. The followers would kiss its behind. And then this is where it gets interesting. The bull claimed a black cat would come down from the statue. It would walk backward with its tail up. The followers would then kiss the cat's behind. After that, the bull said all the lights would go out. The followers would then have sex with each other or with the cat itself. Now, it's important to remember this description came from the church. It was based on confessions. These confessions often came after torture, so we don't know if these rituals truly happened exactly like that, or if they were made up to smear people the church disliked, but the Pope believed them. He believed these heretics were truly evil, and that they used cats, especially black cats, in their dark practices. For the Pope and the church, black cats became symbols. They were symbols of evil, of the devil, of witchcraft. They weren't just innocent animals, they were seen as tools of Satan, or even as the devil himself in animal form. This wasn't about the Pope just disliking cats because they were furry, it was about seeing them as connected to a very dangerous religious movement. A movement that challenged the church's power. The bull Vox in Rama didn't say kill all cats. It wasn't a direct order to hunt them down, but it painted a very dark picture of them. It strongly linked them to heresy and the devil. For people at the time, especially those worried about heresy, this message was powerful. It told them what to think about certain animals, and it gave them a reason to be suspicious. Especially of black cats. This was a time when fear of the devil was strong. Superstition was common. People truly believed in witches and evil spirits. So, a message from the Pope, the head of the church, held a lot of weight. If the Pope said black cats were tied to evil, many people would believe it. They would see these animals differently. This change in how cats were viewed is the key part of this story. It set the stage for later events. It created a climate where cats were no longer just part of the everyday world. They were part of the spiritual battle between good and evil. And on the side of evil, according to the Pope. So Pope Gregory IX wasn't just having a bad day and decided he hated cats. His actions came from a deep fear, a fear that the church was under attack from within, from people he saw as worshiping the devil. And in that dark picture of devil worship, cats, especially black cats, played a central role. His message wasn't a casual dislike. It was a serious condemnation rooted in his religious beliefs and his duty to protect the church. This condemnation had far-reaching, even if unintended, consequences. It changed how a whole continent thought about a common household animal. After Pope Gregory IX sent out his bull, things began to shift for cats in Europe. The bull didn't order a mass killing of cats, but it made them look bad, really bad. When the Pope says something is linked to the devil, people listen, and they get scared. So, a strong negative image of cats started to spread, especially for black cats. They were seen as witches' familiars, or even demons in disguise. This led to local persecutions of cats. It wasn't like a coordinated continent-wide cat hunt. It was more piecemeal. In places where fears of heresy or witchcraft were high, people might take action against cats. They might kill them, they might torture them. Sometimes, cats were burned at the stake with accused witches. People believed killing these devilish creatures would protect them. It would rid their communities of evil. It's hard to get exact numbers for how many cats were killed. Records from that time are not like modern census data. But we know from various accounts that anti-cat sentiment grew. Festivals in some parts of Europe, especially France, started including cat burning as a form of entertainment or ritual purification. This shows how deeply the negative image of cats took hold. It wasn't just a religious belief anymore. It became part of popular culture and folk practice. Think about it this way. If you hear that a certain animal helps the devil, you won't want it around. You might get rid of it. You might not feed stray cats anymore. You might not welcome them into your home. This attitude over time would naturally lead to fewer cats, especially fewer domestic cats, which are the ones that usually live near people and hunt rats in houses and barns. The focus of Vox and Rama was on fighting heresy in Germany, so it's fair to assume that the strongest effects of this changed view of cats happened in those regions first. But ideas travel, and the church's influence was vast, so the negative view of cats spread across other parts of Europe too. It became part of the general background noise of medieval life. A decrease in cat numbers, even a gradual one, could have consequences. And cats are natural predators. They hunt mice and rats. This is what they do best. If you have fewer cats, then you have fewer things eating the mice and rats. And if there are fewer things eating the mice and rats, then there will be more mice and rats. It's a simple food chain idea, but it's important not to overstate this. Europe was a big place, and not every village or town went on a cat-killing spree. Many cats, especially wild ones, would still exist. And even domestic cats were sometimes kept for their mousing skills, despite the Pope's message. There was a mix of fear and practicality, but the overall trend likely was a reduction in their numbers, or at least a reduction in their favored status as household animals. People were less likely to protect them, they were more likely to ignore them, or even actively harm them. This wasn't an immediate, dramatic change. It happened slowly, over decades. From 1233, when the bull was issued, to the mid-1300s, over 100 years passed. That's a lot of time for an ecological shift to occur, a slow, steady decline in the cat population, and a corresponding slow, steady rise in the rodent population, especially in towns and cities where rats thrived. This long lead-up is crucial. The effect wasn't sudden. It was a creeping change that built up over generations. This made the ground fertile for something else, something truly terrible that was coming. Now, let's fast forward a bit. We're moving from the early 1200s to the middle of the 1300s. Around 1346, something truly awful started to spread across Europe. It was called the Black Death. This plague was unlike anything people had ever seen. It killed quickly, it killed brutally, and it killed a huge number of people. The Black Death was caused by a specific type of bacteria. Its name is Yersinia pestis. This bacteria lives in fleas, and these fleas often live on rats. Specifically, black rats were a big problem. These rats loved to live close to people. They thrived in crowded cities and towns. They hid in houses, granaries, and ships. The plague didn't just appear out of nowhere in Europe. It started much further east, in Central Asia. It traveled along trade routes. These were the same routes that brought silk and spices from Asia to Europe. Merchants and their goods traveled these routes, and often rats came along for the ride. Hidden in cargo, on ships, in wagons. So, the plague slowly made its way west. It reached the Black Sea. From there, it hopped onto merchant ships. These ships sailed to ports in Italy, France, and other parts of Europe. When the ships arrived, so did the rats, and so did the fleas carrying the disease. Once the plague landed in a port city, it spread like wildfire. Cities in the Middle Ages were often dirty. They were crowded. People lived very close together. Waste was often thrown into the streets. This created a perfect breeding ground for rats, and it made it easy for the disease to jump from rats to humans. Here's how it worked. A flea would bite an infected rat. The flea would pick up the bacteria. Then, if that rat died, the flea would need a new host. It would jump onto a human. When the flea bit the human, it would pass on the bacteria. The human would then get sick. The symptoms were horrific. People would get huge, painful swellings. These were called buboes. They appeared in the armpits, groin, and neck. That's why it was also called the bubonic plague. People would get fevers, they would vomit, they would cough up blood, and most of them died. Often within days of showing symptoms. The death toll was unimaginable. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 30% and 50% of Europe's population died. In some cities, it was even higher. Entire villages were wiped out. Farmlands lay empty. It changed everything. Society, economy, religion, art, nothing was untouched by the sheer scale of death. People at the time didn't know what caused it. They thought it was God's punishment, or bad air, or a conspiracy by certain groups of people. They didn't understand germs. They didn't know about fleas or rats. All they saw was the terrible sickness and the endless dying. This was the backdrop. A continent ripe for disaster. Crowded cities. Unsanitary conditions. A massive disease traveling from far away. And now, we need to think about how the previous chapters might connect to this unfolding horror. Could the earlier dislike of cats, encouraged by the Pope's bull, have played a role in making things worse? That's the question this theory tries to answer. The stage is set, the plague is here. Now, let's tie these two big ideas together. On one side, we have Pope Gregory IX and his bull, Vox in Rama, in 1233. This bull encouraged a negative view of cats, especially black ones, linking them to evil and heresy. This led to fewer cats, or at least less protection for them, in parts of Europe. On the other side, we have the Black Death, which arrived in the 1340s. It was caused by bacteria carried by fleas, which lived on rats. The proposed connection goes like this. It's a simple chain of events, ecologically speaking. Over 100 years, from 1233 to 1340, a steady decline in cat numbers could easily lead to a significant increase in rat numbers, especially in towns and cities where food waste was abundant, providing a perfect environment for rats to breed. These rats are living in close contact with people. They're in houses, markets, ships, and granaries. They are everywhere humans are. 3. More flea carriers mean more plague. With an increased rat population, there's a larger reservoir for the plague bacteria. When the plague arrived from Asia, it found an ecosystem ready for it. More rats meant more fleas carrying the disease. And more fleas meant more chances for the disease to jump from rats to humans. So the theory suggests that Pope Gregory IX, by condemning cats, accidentally removed a key natural defense against the spread of the plague. He didn't intend to cause a plague. He was trying to fight heresy, but an unintended consequence of his action, and the subsequent change in how people treated cats, might have been a larger rat population. And this larger rat population made Europe much more vulnerable when the plague finally hit. Think about the timing. The bull was issued in 1233. The Black Death began its devastating spread in Europe around 1346. That's over a century apart. This long gap is important. It means the ecological changes didn't need to be immediate or dramatic. A slow, subtle shift over 100 years could easily have a major impact. Cats reproduce, rats reproduce. Over generations, a small change in predator numbers can mean a big change in prey numbers. The geographical spread is also considered. The areas most likely to have seen a reduction in cat populations due to the Pope's influence would be those where the Church's power was strongest, or where anti-heresy campaigns were most intense. When Europe was broadly Christian, so the message would have spread, and the Black Death hit almost all of Europe with devastating force, suggesting a widespread vulnerability. This idea connects two seemingly unrelated historical events, a religious decree about heresy and a global pandemic. It proposes that human beliefs and actions, even those with purely spiritual intentions, can have unforeseen, profound ecological consequences. The Pope's focus was on the soul, on religious purity. He had no way of knowing about bacteria, fleas, or the complex balance of urban ecosystems. He was just doing what he thought was right to protect the Church from what he saw as evil. But this theory isn't without its complexities. It relies on a few assumptions that the bull actually caused a significant decline in cat numbers across wide areas, and that this decline directly led to a major increase in the rat population that was then crucial for the plague spread. These are big assumptions, but the logical steps in the theory itself are sound in principle. Fewer predators, more prey, more disease carriers. It's a compelling narrative, even if it might simplify a very complex historical event. So, how strong is this idea that Pope Gregory IX's dislike of cats caused the Black Death? It's a popular theory. It makes a kind of logical sense at first glance, but when you dig deeper, it gets more complicated. First, let's look at the evidence for a widespread cat persecution. As we talked about, the bull Vox in Rama didn't order everyone to kill cats. It just made them symbols of evil. Yes, local persecutions happened. Cats were sometimes killed. They were linked to witches, but was it on a scale large enough to seriously dent the cat population across all of Europe? Historians debate this. It's hard to find solid proof of a massive continent-wide cat purge. Cats still existed. Many were still valued for hunting rodents. Not everyone followed every papal decree perfectly, especially if it conflicted with practical needs. Then, there's the role of medieval cats themselves. Were domestic cats the primary defense against rats in large, crowded medieval cities? While cats hunt, the sheer number of rats in a typical medieval city, coupled with the vast amount of refuse and food sources, might have simply overwhelmed any number of cats. It's possible that even with more cats, the rat population would still have been enormous. Other factors like sanitation or lack thereof, overcrowding, and the constant flow of goods and rats through ports were probably bigger drivers of rat populations. Consider other factors in the plague spread. Medieval hygiene was poor. People lived in close quarters with animals. Fleas were everywhere, not just on rats, but also on other animals and on people themselves. So, even if there were fewer rats, the disease could still have spread. Also, human movement was key. The plague followed trade routes. It moved with people and their goods often faster than any local ecological change could influence. Another point, the plague returned many times after the initial Black Death. It became endemic in some areas, right? But cat populations would have recovered over time if they had indeed significantly decreased. Yet, the plague kept coming back for centuries. This suggests that other, more fundamental conditions were at play beyond just the number of cats. Also, it's worth noting that the Black Death devastated regions that probably weren't as directly affected by the Pope's bull. For example, some areas that didn't have as strong a history of anti-heresy campaigns still suffered immensely from the plague. This weakens the idea of a direct, singular cause and effect link. So, while the theory is interesting, it likely oversimplifies a complex historical and epidemiological event. The Black Death was a perfect storm. It was caused by a unique bacteria meeting specific conditions of susceptible human population, crowded and unsanitary cities, vast trade networks to spread it, and a lack of scientific understanding to fight it. Pope Gregory IX's bull certainly changed how many people viewed cats, and it's true that fewer predators can lead to more prey. It's also true that more rats meant more plague. These are all valid biological principles. But to say that the Pope accidentally caused the Black Death solely by hating cats is a big leap. It gives too much power to one historical event and ignores many other important factors. The real lesson might be about the unintended consequences of human actions and beliefs. The Pope, driven by religious fervor, condemned an animal he saw as evil. He had no way of knowing how that condemnation might ripple through an ecosystem, let alone interact with a future pandemic. It highlights how human decisions, even those made with good intentions from the Pope's perspective of fighting heresy, can have effects far beyond what anyone could imagine. But to blame him as the direct accidental cause of the Black Death is likely an overstatement. It's a compelling story, but history is often messier and more complex than simple cause and effect narratives.